Hey guys, Chase with Sherpa Equipment Company. Today we're going to be installing this Grizzly on this 4th gen CrewMax Tundra. This is for all 4th gen CrewMax Tundras. And first step we're going to do before we do anything with the rack is go ahead and disconnect the battery. We'll be disconnecting the battery on this truck because it is a drill rack, so we want to make sure that we can safely drill into the roof without any risk of setting off the airbags. Alright, so I'm going to be using a 10mm socket to remove the negative terminal from the battery. Again, this is just for added security when drilling into the roof. Once that's removed, I'm just going to set a microfiber here to block the connection so we don't have to worry about any of that. So now we're going to go over what you're going to receive in your package from us. You're going to have your 2 side plates. This rack comes with 7 crossbars, your wind fairing, and then your hardware pack. In your hardware pack, you're going to have your mounting feet, your rivet mounts, your hardware for the entire rack, your separate wind fairing hardware, and then a small tube of silicone. So the Grizzly rack is a drill rack. What that means is we would highly suggest having a professional install it. This rack will be drilling through your roof and will be getting drill bits close to airbags. If you do feel comfortable drilling into your roof, carry on with this video and we'll show you how to do that, but again, we do recommend professional installation. So before we do anything with the rack itself, I'm going to go ahead and cut open our hardware pack and break down what exactly you'll have in your hardware pack and how to identify each mount. So here we're going to separate our mounting feet, our rivet mounts, and then we'll just make a big pile of hardware. Doesn't matter too much that your fairing hardware is installed in that, or mixed in with that, and then we'll have our silicone as well. So we'll go ahead right into the mounts. You'll notice that you'll have 2 mounts labeled with an F and 2 mounts labeled with a rear. That's going to be your front mounts and your rear mounts. Another important thing to note on these mounts is you're going to have a small notch on each one of these corners. And all that means is this is a way to tell the direction of the mount, so your notch is always going to face the front side of the vehicle. So your rear mount with this notch in it, for example, is going to go on your passenger side, and that's going to be your driver's side. Same with the fronts. Just want to match those up to make sure you install them on the right side. Going into our rivet mounts, there are 2 very big differences on these. You're going to have one set that has a curved bottom, and you're going to have one that has a completely flat bottom. Your curved bottom rivet mounts are going to go with your front feet, and your flat are going to go with your rear. You can check this by holding both of them together. You'll see a gap on one of them, which will easily tell you which one's curved, and you can set those aside with the mounts that they're paired with. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of separate our hardware. This will just make it easier through the install process and help with organization. Alright, so now that we have our hardware separated, we can briefly go through. You're going to have your short black socket buttons, 1/2 inch. Those are going to be for your fairings. You'll have a big pile of 1/4 inch washers. You'll have your 1 inch long socket buttons, also black or silver depending on your rack color. You'll have a stack of T-nuts. You're going to have 8 rivets. You're going to have your M8 washers. These are not to be confused with your other 1/4 inch silver washers. Those are different sizes. You're going to have your M8 bolts, and then your 9/16 1/4 20 bolts, along with some more silver 1/4 inch washers. Alright, so the next step is we're going to be dropping the headliner slightly on the edges. If this is your first time doing a drill rack, we do recommend you dropping the entire headliner. We've done a few of these, so we're just going to double check, make sure all of the airbags are in the spots we think they are. So to do that, we're going to grab a couple trim removal tools. We're going to have a few different ones just to see what we got, and a 10mm socket. And then the first step to popping the A-pillar and the B-pillar plastic off is we're just going to remove the door seal. This should peel off really easily. We don't need to fully pull it off. Just enough to get it out of our way, make it a little easier to work with. We're going to do that on the front and the back. Again, that should just pop off pretty easy. Just drop it down a little bit. So we're going to start by pulling down the front trim plastic on the A-pillar. I'm going to use a very thin, flat little picking tool. And to do that, we're just going to get up under these plastic clips. There's going to be 2 of them on your handle. Being careful not to damage the handle. This should pop off pretty easy. The same on the back handle. Again, being very careful. You saw that front clip pop out. We want to avoid that if we can. We'll just work around the plastic until it pops out. It should pop out relatively easily. If it's not coming out in one area, just work around. Try to find wherever it pops those clips off. On this one, I'm going to grab another tool and get on both sides of it, because this one's being a little bit more tricky. There we go. So this will expose the 10mm bolts holding these handles on. Now I'll grab our 10mm on an extension and remove the bolts. Again, there should just be two 10mm bolts. And once you have those bolts removed, this should just pop off. And we're going to do the same on the other side. Now the handle's off, we're just going to drop this A-pillar trim down a little bit. We don't need to fully remove it, just enough to get it out of the way so we can get up in the roof. And we'll go back to the B-pillar. And we will do the same thing, popping it off, just working slowly. Don't want to break those tabs. Once you feel those tabs pop out, your headliner should be accessible. We're actually going to go ahead and also remove the C-pillar. This one's a little bit easier, no screws or anything. You should be able to just pop this one down, pop that out just enough to, again, get up in the headliner a little bit to see what's going on. If you're not comfortable with the flexibility you have out of the headliner, maybe your B-pillar didn't pop off enough, you can also remove lower down on the B-pillar, just two more tabs. This will expose two clips or bolts depending on your model. We'll pop those out, and this will remove this entire plastic piece. We'll just kind of set it off to the side, and then we'll get a little bit more flexibility on the headliner if you're not completely dropping it. That way you can kind of feel up above the airbags, make sure you have a clear pocket to drill into. So on this truck, there are two little plastic clips Toyota likes to use that's almost like a button. I'm going to use a thin prying tool again just to get up under there. Should be able to pop the button out pretty easily. You want to make sure you don't break these because we will be reusing them. And there's two of these, so we'll do it to both of those. Both of those came out easily. So now should be able to pop the rest of that B-pillar off. So if you did remove your whole headliner, you'll be able to see up kind of above the airbags now. If you just drop the edge, it's a good idea to feel kind of up right about where your mounts are going to be going. And you can kind of get your hand up under. You kind of feel around. Make sure you have room from your gutter up here to your airbags. Make sure there's no loose or brackets up there that need to be worried about. You're still going to want to be very careful. Also be very careful when you're putting your hands in that headliner. If you crease this, it's pretty hard to get those creases out. Now that I've confirmed on both sides that the headliner is clear of any obstructions that will be issues when drilling, we can go ahead and start assembling our rack and start preparing for the install. We're going to start building the rack now. We're going to start with two crossbars. It's helpful if you have a friend help you with this step. We're going to kind of just lay our crossbars out. Those will be moved around. Grab a side plate, have your buddy come on in. He's going to take a side plate for me, and in the meantime I'm going to grab 4 socket buttons, the inch-long ones. So I'm going to grab 4 of the socket buttons themselves, and then also 4 washers. And what he's doing here is he's lining up our 2 mounting crossbar slots. So we have our second from the rear slot, and then we have our forwardmost slot here on the top edge. Those are going to be the slots that we were aiming for. So he's lined it up. We're going to get our crossbar. We're going to get our socket button started into the crossbars. The position in the slot doesn't matter a ton yet, just enough to get both of our side plates up, and we can do the adjustments later. We're also not tightening these down. We're just keeping them loose. We're going to be sliding this rack around a little bit before we decide on its final position. And once we have this side pretty much started, we'll grab our other side plate and we'll do the same on the other side. Again, lining up the correct slots with the crossbar and just loosely starting or bolts into the crossbars themselves. So now that we got our crossbars and our side plates attached here on the table, now we're going to go ahead and center up our crossbars in the slot. We're going to want to get this as close to center as possible because this is going to be the first step in deciding our position of our mounting feet for the roof of the truck. So this will kind of affect where we're drilling the rack. So you're going to want to get these as centered as possible. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but we're going to try. And then once you have them centered, you're happy with the position, tighten those socket buttons down and do the same on the rest of these slots. All right, so our rack is semi-assembled on the table. We're going to now focus on the mounts and the rivet mounts. So one important thing to note on our rivet mounts is you probably won't have to deal with this on a silver rack, but it's a good idea while everything's apart. Go ahead and check your rivets and see how they fit through the holes. We have had occasions where this is one of them. The powder coat builds up in that 3/16 hole, which makes the rivet mount not fit. So a simple fix to that, grab a 3/16 drill bit, just run it through there real quick, shouldn't have any resistance, then double check your rivets again. Now that our rack is pretty much assembled, ready to go up on the truck on the table there, we're going to focus on our mounts. We're going to be installing our mounting feet onto our rivet mounts. Again, double check that you have your flat bottomed ones for your rear mounts and your contoured bottom ones for your front mounts. That is very important with how the rack's going to sit on the truck. It's a good idea to go through, double check before anything's installed, take a rivet, make sure it fits through that hole nicely. Just want to double check that on all of your rivet mounts, and then we can go ahead and start installing our mounts onto the rivet mounts. To do this, we're going to take our M8 bolts with our M8 washers, 2 per mount, and get those started. These are going to come off again during the install, so when I install this, I'm just going to do it finger tight. Just get it snug down so it's not moving around. That way we don't have to fight it later, and we're going to do that on each one. Again, making sure your flats are with your rears and your contoured are with your fronts. This is a good time to note that you might have extra washers, you might have extra bolts left over. No need to panic on that. We generally send a little bit extra hardware just in case you lose some are faulty. So now that we got our rivet mounts though attached to our mounting feet, we can take these over to our rack and we're going to stage them from being mounted. Again, this is a really important step to note that notch on the front of the mount is going to face the front of the vehicle. The rivet mount is going to be towards the side plate, so that's an easy way to tell where each one is going to go. So we'll just set these up to be mounted. Upside down it can be a little confusing, just make sure that notch is facing forward though. Okay, now that we got our mount staged, come back to our hardware pile. We're going to grab 8 T-nuts. And we're also going to grab our 1/4 20 short bolts along with our 1/4 inch washers. I'm just going to grab all those and we'll go get these mounts on. So when you're mounting your mounts up to your crossbar, it's very simple, but you're going to want to make sure how you put your T-nuts in. The round side of the T-nut is going to go down into the track. All you need to do to mount them is drop them in and kind of flatten it out. It does not matter which side the kind of thick side faces, completely irrelevant. And you can install these really anywhere on the crossbar just for setup. We're going to slide them around later. Then we'll take our 1/4 20 bolts, set our mount on the crossbar, and find your T-nuts underneath. And we'll just get these bolts started in the T-nuts. You're going to want to get it tight enough so the bolts aren't just falling out as soon as there's any movement, but you also want to keep it loose enough that you can slide the mounting foot back and forth on the crossbar. That'll make it easier when we're up on top of the truck adjusting where the mount should sit. It's a good idea also when we are setting this up to go up on the roof. We found it's easiest if you just kind of have your mounting foot slid all the way out. That way you don't have your mounting foot dropping on the middle of your roof, scratching paint and causing damage. Alright, so now we're going to mount our rear mounts the same way. Again, just making sure you're not just facing forward and your flat rivet mount is attached to your rear mount. Again, tightening the bolt down, backing it off one turn, just enough to slide it around on the crossbar. And sliding all the way out to the edge. Okay, so all of our mounts are loosely installed on our crossbars. Before we grab a friend and get it up on the truck, I'm just gonna do one more visual inspection, making sure all of those notches on the bottom of the mounting foot are facing the front of the rack. These two are, so I can automatically assume that these two are as well. And then one more visual confirmation that our contoured mounting, or contoured rivet mount is on the front mounts, and our flat rivet mount is on the rears. Once I have confirmed all of that, got them all slid out to the side, we're gonna grab a friend and get it up on the roof. All right, and now we go up. We'll lower it down. And then now we're gonna just take good care of getting this in the tracks. So here's where we're gonna move our mounts. This is where it comes important to remember to leave them loose enough that you can move. And you're gonna wanna set these right down in the gutter. I'm gonna set my foot down quickly. And it doesn't matter if it's centered yet, we can adjust all that later, but we're gonna just wanna get it down in the gutter initially, so then we can adjust from there. Go forward a little bit. There we go. Nice. We got both of the mounting feet in the gutter. It's just on the factory foam that comes on the vehicle. On this truck, there's no removing any plastic gutter, rain protectors, whatever. Now we're gonna start adjusting side to side, forward to back, ensuring that we like the rack, how it's sitting on the truck. We'll mark our holes and then start thinking about drilling. So essentially what we're looking at, once our rack is up on the truck, we're gonna wanna pay attention to how our spline of the rack follows the body line of the truck. So as it sits right now, I can tell that the rack's gonna need to go back. It's too low in the rear, too close to the paint, and too high in the front. So we're gonna end up shifting the whole rack back a little bit. And then we're also gonna start looking at side to side. We're probably gonna be putting the fairing up here in a second to make sure we're centered. That's a good way to tell where the center of the vehicle is compared to where the center of the rack is. So we'll start making those fine tweaks, fine adjustments until we're happy with how the rack sits and start marking holes. So one important thing to note here is Cortez's side over here is looking relatively close to where we want it to be. It's sitting up a good distance off the roof. But then you come to this side and it's a little closer to the roof, still pretty close, but we kind of have our general idea of where the rack should sit forward and backwards on our mounting feet. However, it's not centered right now. So we're gonna be a little closer to the roof on this side, a little farther off on that side. So that's gonna come down to side-to-side adjustment. And to kind of dial that in, we're gonna install a fairing on it and start moving side to side with it. All right, so now we're gonna be installing the fairing onto our crossbar. So to do this, we're gonna open up our fairing. Should have a nice Sherpa sticker in there. All right, once our fairing's unwrapped, I'm gonna set it down on the table flat and I'm gonna line up the crossbar so the edges are relatively flush with the edge of the fairings. You'll notice that this fairing has a slight bow in it. That's not gonna be an issue once it gets installed onto the crossbar. When installing the fairing, I like to draw a little imaginary line between your bolt holes on the fairing to the crossbar and all three, and that's where I'll kind of use my rough guess on where those T-nuts are gonna sit. So again, we'll just drop our T-nuts in like we did on the mounts. As long as the round side's down, you're good to go. And once those are all in, we will take our 1/2-inch socket buttons with our 1/4-inch washers and we will get those pre-installed. And now we are ready to set the fairing up on the crossbar and get it bolted down. So I like to start with the middle holes. It makes adjusting easier. So I'll kind of get that right over those socket buttons down below. Now that I have my middles in, I can slide the whole fairing back and forth, side to side, just to find those other T-nuts below. Assuming my lining up was relatively close, it should be pretty easy. Again, you just want to keep these loose until you have all 6 in. And we'll have to just slightly adjust here to expose those ones below. And once you have all 6 in, we're going to feel the edges. I like to put my hands on either end of the crossbar and just slide the fairing until the edge of the fairing is flush with the edge of the crossbar. You're going to want that to be as close as possible. It'll help with the best fitment on the rack. Once you're happy with the fitment of the fairing on the crossbar, you can take your Allen and tighten these down. Now once all 6 of these are tight, you're going to call in your friend one more time. He's going to grab 4 inch-long socket buttons and 4 washers, get those installed. Gonna give me 2 of them, and he's gonna head up to the other side of the truck. Careful when dropping this over to him, just like the rack. It's a pretty heavy part. It'll definitely take off some paint if you drop it. We'll make sure it gets it first. And the placement of the fairing right off the bat is not hugely critical. We're just gonna wanna keep it off the roof until we get ready to tighten it down. And we'll get it lined up to where it should sit on the side plates. Cortez lined his end up. You're gonna want the bottom edge of your edge trim here to be pretty much flush with the point of the side plate, wherever you find that nicest. And it should ideally sit about a 1/4 inch off your roof. The rack is not secured in any way, shape, or form right now though, so you don't have to worry too much about that, assuming you have it in the right position. Looks like mine slipped down a little bit there. Assuming you have it in the right position, it should be good later on. I'm just gonna tighten one of these now because the fairing will be coming off later. It's gonna make marking our holes a little bit easier. But now we have a way to center the rack side to side. So after a bunch of side to side adjustments, forward and back adjustments, we're pretty happy with where the rack's sitting. A couple tips or tricks, I guess, to help center up your roof or your rack. I like to go off of where the top corner of your glass meets the bottom corner of where your roof starts, the painted portion. I like to use that as a reference point for my side plates. So I'll kind of go back and forth. Sometimes you can go off the mirrors, but I don't always trust that the mirror's in the dead center. But you can kind of go back and forth, check out where the side plate meets the glass and the roof, and kind of go from there. On the side, it's pretty obvious to see. You just want to find the spline that fits the best. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect yet. We haven't drilled anything, but if we can find, or if we can get it as close as we can without it being drilled, it's going to be that much easier once everything's drilled. Coming around to the back, we tried a new little technique where we make a mark up, pretty hard to see, but measure from side plate to side plate, make a mark in the dead center, and off that mark you can kind of align it with your antenna. If that's dead center, you pretty much can assume that the rack will be sitting square. And then again, at the end of the day, the most important part is just visually walking around it, checking fitment, double checking fitment, triple checking fitment, to make sure you're going to be happy with where it is once it's drilled. All right, so now that we are happy with where the rack's sitting, we're going to remove the fairing. That'll be the last step before we go ahead and punch our holes, mark them, do whatever we want to make sure that it's in the same spot when we start drilling. So we'll grab the friend again and take the fairing off, and then we'll start punching holes. All right, so now we get to do the really exciting stuff, which is getting ready to drill the holes and then drilling the holes. There's not really a wrong way to do this. It's just important that you do a way that you're comfortable with and that you're going to be accurate with. So a lot of people use a center punch right off the bat. I'm going to use this small punch tool that I can see around a little bit better to make sure that this gets in the center of those rivet holes as much as possible. Then we'll get the rack off, then I'll punch it, and then we'll start drilling. So we're going to go up, we're going to mark all 8 of our holes, try to get as dead center as you possibly can. Make a nice impact, mark, whatever, punch, and we'll get the rack off and start drilling. It's also a good idea when you're double checking all this stuff, make sure your rivet mount is as centered as it can be in the track. It's just going to make it easier. You're going to have a little bit more wiggle room when drilling the holes and getting it reinstalled. If you're too close to one side, you're kind of limiting yourself on where it can go. But yeah, so you want to make sure it's centered as possible, and we're just punching our holes now. So I'm punching and then just double checking, triple checking, making sure, because we don't want to get it confused with any other holes on the roof. So you really want to make something that you're going to be able to recognize and comfortably drill. Removing the rack, you're going to want to be equally as careful putting as you were when you put it up. We're going to go off the back this time. Might be a little easier for us. Go ahead and step down. And we'll flip it back over so we can get these mounting feet off and set it to the side for right now. So now, since I did not punch it right off the get-go, we're going to go up with our center punch that hole a few times. If you marked it, you're definitely going to want to make sure you do this. If not, these roofs tend to let your drill bit walk around a lot, and that is the opposite of what we want to happen. So we'll get up, punch our spot a few times. On this truck, excuse me, on this truck, we have a pretty thick layer of foam before we get to the actual roof. That tends to sometimes help, sometimes it makes it a little trickier, but we'll see on this truck if it drills nicely. I think it should. But you gotta punch definitely a few times to get through that layer of foam, and just to ensure that you get a straight through drill with no walking. All right, so our holes are marked, punched, double checked, and now we get to start drilling. So this is kind of up to you, personal preference wise. I'm gonna step up the bit 3 times probably on this truck. I just really want to make sure that that hole stays where we want it to be. If it walks at all, it'll definitely make the install a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to start with something small. I'm going to start with a 5/64, I think. And I'm going to be using a drill stop. We definitely also recommend using that. That'll make sure your drill doesn't just plunge in through your airbag. We definitely do not want that as part of our install. So we're going to make sure we have a correct size drill stop, get it set up on our drill bit, and start drilling. Okay, so we got our 5/64 bit on here. I got my drill stop set about 1/2 inch up. Worst case scenario, we can move it back up if it doesn't go all the way through, but we want to be really careful when making our first holes. We did confirm that there's room over the airbags here, but we're just going to be careful still. And essentially feel our way through that foam, and then yeah, just start drilling. Making sure the bit does not try to walk on us. So after attempting to drill that hole out at first, I think we either had a bad bit or just didn't want to go through. So we dropped the bit down again. We're going to try it with a 1/16 this time, using that existing hole. Hopefully get a little bit better results. There we go. So this customer has a little bit of wrap over his original factory color. You'll see it kind of covering up the hole. We just want to take extra precaution of that. But our pilot hole went through, so we'll do the same on the front hole. Perfect. So our pilot holes are drilled on this one. We're going to repeat this on the next 6 holes, and then we'll step it up. Okay, so we got all our first pilot holes drilled. I stepped it up to a 7/64. Still got that drill stop on there. We're going to do our next step up. Now we're going to step up to a 3/16. This will be our final hole, and then we'll install the rivets. Okay, so now that our holes are drilled on our roof, we're stepped all the way up to 3/16. We can come back to our rack that's on the table, and all of these finger tight M6 bolts are going to be coming out, and we're just going to be grabbing the rivet mounts and getting these riveted to the roof. And then once these are all riveted to the roof, we will be attaching the whole rack back onto it. Keep the flat and contoured separate, and we'll take them up to the roof from there off. Okay, so to get these onto the roof for the driver's side, we're going to take 4 rivets, 1 of each are flat and contoured mounts, rivet mounts, our little bottle of silicone, and a rivet gun. One good thing to do before we get these tightened down to the roof, I'm going to grab a vacuum, get the gutter all cleaned out, because we want as good of a seal as we can get between the roof and the gutter mount. Okay. Another quick thing you can do to save yourself a little bit of time, just go through, again, check that one rivet, you know, fits in all your holes. That way you don't get everything set up, ready to go, and then not have a hole drilled out wide enough. So since those all fit, we're going to be laying down some silicone here. Make sure this area is clean. And all we're going to be doing is taking our silicone and we're going to be laying down a glob of silicone in the hole and then just around the surrounding areas of the hole. You want to make sure this gets full coverage. This will be preventing water from somehow sneaking down in there. Once your silicone's applied, take your rivet mounts, flat being the rear. I like to put my rivet through to begin with. Helps line everything up, keep everything in line. Then go down through your drilled holes, bottom it out. Sometimes you got to give it a little tap to seat all the way. Now that our rivet mount is flat against the roof, both of our rivets are seated completely. Go ahead and rivet these bad boys in. And now it's ready to be mounted. All right, so our rivet mounts are attached to the roof now and siliconed in. So now we're going to be picking up this rack one more time, taking our 8 M8 bolts up there with us and securing our rivet or our mounting feet to the rivet mounts. And again, we're going to set our mounts to the outside so they're not sliding all over the place or falling out. So we're going to line them up one side at a time. This just makes sure we're not laying it on any paint. And he'll get his M8 bolts started just finger tight, or even just when they're started, then I can start working on my side. He only has one in there. Okay, so right now he's getting his side in. I'm going to do the same. I'm just keeping everything loose right now. Once we get all 8 bolts in, we can start our process one more time of adjusting side to side. It should be a little easier this time since we know the rack is where it should be forward and backwards. Pretty much all we have to focus on is getting it centered side to side. But we'll probably make another mark off that shark fin back there. And then again, using these 2 points to center it up, we will find a spot we're happy with. All right, so while he's still on that side getting his threaded in by hand, are they all in? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and just tighten down. We're gonna take a 13 socket on an extension. I also have a 13 wrench just in case some of the angles get too weird. And we're gonna just suck these bolts on down. You're gonna wanna go till they're nice and snug. Once those are snug, move on to the next one. Again, we have not adjusted side to side yet. We're just getting everything secure and tucked down. And those are nice and tight. He's gonna do the same on that side. So now our mounting feet are tightened down to the rivet mounts. We're gonna go ahead and put the fairing back up. This will be the last time the fairing goes on as well, so we're gonna pay extra close attention to the position on this. And this will help us with our final centering of the rack. Again, when positioning the fairing, you're going to want to make sure that the bottom edge of the fairing, where the edge trim comes off of it, you're going to want to make sure that's sitting just about flush with the bottom corner of your side plate. And once you're happy with the position, kind of double check the roof. You can tighten down both those bolts and the fairing's in place. Good. Okay, so like earlier in the video, we just used the same technique to center up the rack on the truck. Check it side to side, and then also marking that center point on the back of the rack and centering it up with our cross fin, or our shark fin. Now that we're happy with the position of the rack on the truck, we're gonna go ahead, take 2 7/16, and we're gonna tighten down those bolts that go up from your mounting foot into the crossbar. Once those are tightened down, we'll put in the remaining crossbars and the rack will be done. Okay. So now that all of our mounting feet are tight to our crossbars, our rack is completely tight on the truck. Our M8 is tight into the rivet mounts. All we have to do now is put our remaining crossbars up and this rack is complete. Got 4. Perfect. One back in. Okay, so after you have the remaining crossbars installed, there's only a few steps left. Pretty much you're just gonna have to re-put together your interior. If you need help with that, just go back to the video, kind of just do the reverse steps of that. You're also gonna wanna make sure to now reconnect your battery again. Once your interior is put back together, battery's reconnected, you're good to go. It's a good idea to just spell it back through, double check all your hardware, make sure you tightened everything. After a few weeks of driving, a couple hundred miles, good idea to go back through one more time. Check that hardware all one more time, just make sure everything's still tight. If it's tight after that point, you're good to go. If you're installing this and you run into any issues or weird problems, please don't hesitate to reach out. Shoot us an email, give me a call. We'll be happy to walk you through it. Again, we really hope that you consider going to a professional dealer to have this installed. It is a very depth install, but if you do decide to take it on, we are here to help. Other than that, the rack looks great, and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.